Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. This video series is a chapter by chapter breakdown of Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth. I will be reading quotes from the book as well as from my notes. And I want to emphasize that this is my own personal interpretation of Eckhart Tolle's writings. Please feel free to leave a comment, and I promise to personally read all of the comments, but I apologize in advance that I just simply won't have the time to respond personally to every comment. I also highly suggest that you listen to the Oprah Winfrey Super Soul Sunday podcast that she does about the New Earth book with Eckhart Tolle in the same chapter by chapter breakdown format. There's a lot of really awesome information there during the podcast, but they do have a lot of side discussions and they answer callers' questions, so the information is different and slightly different format. I also highly suggest that you get your own copy of A New Earth and read it along and make your own notes however you like, and watch the videos and you'll get the most out of the writings. All right, well, I hope you enjoy the video. Okay, so chapter 1, The Flowering of Human Consciousness. So Eckhart Tolle begins the book very literally by using the example of a flower, and he begins the chapter by illustrating the development of the planet and the growth of the first flowers on Earth. Eckhart Tolle talks about the flower, its ethereal qualities, and discusses how the flower evolves to play an essential role in the evolution of human consciousness, how we were fascinated with the flower, and how flowers provided inspiration to the early artists and mystics on the planet. Eckhart Tolle highlights how Jesus once advised us to contemplate the flowers and learn from them how to live. Eckhart Tolle includes this to emphasize the flower's ethereal qualities. For example, it's born a bud, it opens, and it transforms into a beautiful, colorful flower, and then quickly withers, dies, and returns to the earth, exactly like we do as humans. Eckhart Tolle goes on to discuss the awakening and the spiritual quality of flowers. Nature is always fully present and alive in the now, and why it's so important to shift our mindset and conscious minds on living and being in the now and in the present moment. Eckhart Tolle goes on to include other forms of nature, the bird and the crystal, and he contends that these are enlightened life forms. The flower and the crystal and the bird, through their use of their symbolism, have been preparing us as a human collective consciousness for the planetary spiritual awakening that we are beginning to witness. Eckhart Tolle begins his writings on the spiritual awakening by pointing out that an essential part of the spiritual awakening is the recognition and awareness of the unawakened you, the ego, as it thinks, speaks, and acts, as well as the recognition and awareness of the collectively conditioned mental processes that perpetuate the unawakened state. What does Eckhart Tolle mean by collectively conditional mental processes? Here are some examples. Negative self-talk in your mind or out loud. This is totally your ego. You are not your thoughts. Ruminating, repeating the stressful day's events over and over again. What I could have done, what I could have said, what I should have done, how I could have acted, telling yourself stories and making up stories. Totally stresses you out for nothing. Codependency on any level. Feelings of unworthiness. You are worthy. You are perfect just the way you are. Moving on. This book points out the main aspects of the ego, how they affect us individually and collectively. Why this is important. There are two reasons. One being, when you're familiar with the basic mechanics of the ego, you recognize when it comes out and your awareness is so much more heightened. The ego won't be able to trick you into identifying with it, and it won't have the ability to negatively affect your life experience. The second reason why it's important to be familiar with the different aspects of the ego is because when this happens, you open a door to your spiritual awakening. Now I want to read this quote from page 8. When you recognize the unconsciousness in you, that which makes the recognition possible is the arising consciousness, is the awakening. You cannot fight against the ego and win, just as you cannot fight against the darkness. The light of consciousness is all that is necessary. You are that light. All that we have to do is be aware and be in the now. All we have is this moment. Eckhart Tolle continues chapter 2 with a section titled Our Inherited Dysfunction. In this section, he discusses how religions have conditioned us on an ideological level to believe that our normal or natural state of mind is one of madness or delusion and of suffering and sin. And now I want to read a quote from page 9. According to Christian teachings, the normal collective state of humanity is one of original sin. Sin is a word that has been greatly misunderstood and misinterpreted. Literally translated from the ancient Greek in which the New Testament was written, to sin means to miss the mark. As an archer who misses the target, so to sin means to miss the point of human existence. It means to live unskillfully, blindly, and thus to suffer and cause suffering. This mindset over the course of human history has led to our mental dysfunction and our own manifestation of the ego. Eckhart Tolle poignantly contends that despite our evolved, technological, and intelligent state that we exist in, we are still tainted with madness. Now I want to read a quote from page 10. This gets good. Science and technology have magnified the destructive impact that the dysfunction of the human mind has upon the planet, other life forms, and upon humans themselves. That is why the history of the 20th century is where that dysfunction and collective insanity can be most clearly recognized. A further factor is that dysfunction is actually intensifying and accelerating. Eckhart Tolle continues chapter 1 with a brief summarization of the succession of wars that have broken out on the planet starting with World War I in 1914. The combined wars and genocides during the 1900s have globally killed over 100 million human beings. I want to read another quote from page 11. Another aspect of the collective dysfunction of the human mind is the unprecedented violence that humans are inflicting on other life forms and the planet itself. The destruction of the oxygen-producing forests and other plant and animal life, ill treatment of animals in factory farms, and poisoning of rivers, oceans, and air. Driven by greed, ignorant of their connectedness to the whole, humans persist in behavior that, if continued unchecked, can only result in their own destruction. The time is now to change our behavior as a collective. If we don't, we will destroy ourselves. The main point for the remainder of this chapter is that the human subconscious creation of the ego, driven by fear, greed, and the desire for power, has resulted in the suffering that we have seen on this planet on every level. Eckhart Tolle continues chapter 1 with his discussion on the arising new consciousness. He illustrates how every human being has the potential in this lifetime to become awakened or achieve enlightenment through the recognition and awareness of the human's egoic dysfunctional madness. We will transcend our created suffering, and a new dimension of consciousness will flower on the planet. Eckhart Tolle continues his discussion on the arising new consciousness by stating that the greatest achievement of humanity is not its works of art, science, or technology, but the recognition of its own dysfunction, its own madness, the ego. Eckhart Tolle brings up some specific examples of early spiritual teachers who spoke of healing and transcendence. But then the author segues into his discussion on how religion and egoic religiosity squashed these ideas and practices. He discusses how religiosity and the development of religions contributed to the development of the human ego. Now I want to read a quote from page 15. And so religions, to a large extent, became divisive rather than unifying forces. Instead of bringing about an ending of violence and hatred through a realization of the fundamental oneness of all life, they brought about more violence and more hatred, more divisions between people, as well as between different religions and even within the same religion. They became ideologies, belief systems, people could identify with, and so use them to enhance their false sense of self. Eckhart Tolle does conclude his argument by stating that at the core of every religion is the real truth, underneath the many layers of distortion and misinterpretation. Eckhart Tolle continues this section by getting more specific about the difference between spirituality and religion, and he discusses the evolving role of established religions in the new arising consciousness. The author talks about how the human ego is destined to dissolve and how fear and ego-based institutions, whether it's a religious one, a corporation, or a government, will disintegrate from within. And he uses communism as an example, how it was such a solid monolithic structure that it appeared to be, how it quickly crumbled and dissolved from within. The next section of chapter 1 is the urgency of transformation. In this section, Eckhart Tolle discusses how the dysfunction of the human ego is threatening the survival of the planet. And now I want to read a quote from page 22. Ego is no more than this: identification with form, which primarily means thought forms. If evil has any reality, and it has a relative, not an absolute reality, this is also its definition: complete identification with form, physical form, thought forms, and emotional forms. Then he goes on to say, if the structures of the human mind remained unchanged, we will always end up recreating fundamentally the same world, the same evils, and the same dysfunction. The author concludes chapter 1 with a section titled A New Heaven and a New Earth. In this section, Eckhart Tolle explains how the inspiration of this book actually came from the Bible. In the Old Testament and New Testament, the Bible describes how there will be a collapse of the existing world order and a new heaven and a new earth will arise. And I just want to read a quote from page 23. Collective human consciousness and life on our planet are intrinsically connected. A new heaven is the emergence of a transformed state of human consciousness, and a new earth is its reflection in the physical realm. Since human life and human consciousness are intrinsically one with the life of the planet, as the old consciousness dissolves, there are bound to be synchronistic geographic and climactic natural upheavals in many parts of the planet, some of which we are already witnessing now. All right, everyone, this concludes our discussion on Eckhart Tolle's Chapter 1 of A New Earth. I hope that you liked this video. Please like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for the next video that I do on Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth Chapter 2, Ego, the Current State of Humanity. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video.